So, first of all, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Mollica, I'm a documentary photographer and also the founding director of the Offspring Photo Meet, which is a small but wonderful festival in East London that happens every June. So I'm not going to show you the website, but remember Photo Meet, and you can drop me always an email if you want to know more about the Photo Meet or for anything else. Now, you can interrupt me whenever you want, because I take this as an intimate encounter, and I feel like that you're going to be my friends by the end of it. And you know why? Because I'm going to show you a considerable portion of my life since I was 5 years old until my age now, 44. The last images I'm showing you have been taken in September. And I had to leave out a lot of stuff, but I tried to condensate the most relevant highlights that could draw my career as a photojournalist / documentary photographer, because the verbs and terminologies, they do change. And when I first started in photography, I was defining myself as a reportage photographer, then a photojournalist, then a documentary photographer, and now really a photographer. So it's very much progressing for the better that you use less words. But let me jump into this. So, at 5 years old, I probably misbehaved. I don't remember exactly what did I do, but I was in the house where my grandmother was looking after us, and she sent me to the naughty corner in a room for punishment. And I went, but I was very angry at her. And so I just did whatever time. And I grabbed a piece of paper and a few colors, and I painted the act of my grandmother sending me to the naughty corner. And I added the two horns as the devil. And this was somehow a clear statement from my side to show my grandmother how terrible she was with me. From that moment onwards, I could have become a painter or a photographer, and I let you guess what I became, because I wasn't really skillful. Despite the fact that I still paint, I'm stubborn, but my paintings are terrible, so I hope I can do an exhibition in the future when I become very old to take the piece out of me, because this would be the sole purpose of it. When I was 20 years old, I decided to move to London. And I decided to move to London because I've had enough of Sicily. I wanted to expand the coordinates of reference of my life. I always felt that the place where I was born, despite being beautiful, was far too tight for the horizons that I could guess were existing, the world, no? And I needed an excuse to travel, to know the world, and to measure myself to it. Also, I always been very, very much curious, and photography would have given me the opportunity to dive into the life of others, justified from an object that was between me and the world. But I didn't really know what to do, because my father, before becoming a lawyer, was an amateur photojournalist. And I grew up with this wonderful prints lying everywhere at home. I took his enlarger and chemicals. Well, I bought new chemicals, but you know, I took other stuff. And I started developing, taking pictures, developing and printing my stuff since I was 13 years old. Of course, I was really bad. I destroyed, I don't know, many rolls. I messed up with papers, and you know, I was terrible. But I had this very, very honest passion towards the medium. So eventually, I said to myself, "What do I do in here?" Because I was enrolled in the university, and I was doing nothing really. I was drinking coffee and chasing girls. So instead of drinking coffee and chasing girls, I decided to drink beer and chasing girls in London. Coffee was very cheap in Palermo back then. Anyway, when I moved in here, I had a modest camera, a Nikon, whatever, banal camera, and I was walking around London taking pictures of things that were, attracting my curiosity. But my mother was very keen for me to enroll in the university, so I did. And I enrolled at the foundation course at the LCP, and eventually I went on to the BA in photography at the LCP. The LCP is now called the LCC, and is a totally different thing now. Before was pretty much a terrible business. In fact, the first assignment that we've been given was to take pictures of London. And I asked, what kind of pictures, I'm not going to name the tutors. And they said, well, pictures of London. I said, you sure you don't have any guidelines? And they said, no, you're free to do anything. And so I did. I went around and took pictures of people, homeless, lonely people, and I was trying to draw a diary of my life in London. It was very much a personal account, but I was referred. And that was the first big blow I received, because I asked, why did you refer me? I was seeking for explanations, because I was there to learn. In the meantime, I was working in the night, in bars to earn my money, because I wanted to be independent from my family. And the tutors never been able to explain me anything other than your work is not good enough. And I said, okay, if my work is not good enough, you are not good enough for me, because you're not able to explain me anything, really, and I cannot waste my time. So I left the school, and this photograph here, which was referred from them, is now in the permanent collection of the Museum of London, and was published in one of the first collective books that featured me, published by W. Lewis on London street photography. So I was very proud of this achievement that came many years after the big first blow. My dream was to become an editorial magazine photographer, and I never realized, I could have never imagined, especially after the first blow, that I would have been featured and I would have been commissioned by the best magazines from Britain, Germany, Italy, France. And so I take this again as a reminder of how lucky I have been in my life to achieve some of my biggest dreams. But of course it's not really easy to go there, and I had to do a lot of stuff. In the first 4 years of my life in London, I was assisting a photographer, an amazing photographer who taught me everything, Hélène Binet. And if you don't know her name, take your pen and paper. Hélène Binet, she's the Cartier-Bresson of architectural photography. She's just a sheer genius. And she taught me how to print properly, develop, read the space, engage with photography on several levels. So she was, and she still is, my biggest mentor. Anyway, I was inspired by Magnum photographers, by Eugene Richards, Cartier-Bresson, but also Kertész. The traditional documentary street photography was my Bible. In fact, my very first book of photography was In Our Time from Magnum, despite the fact that we had, and we still have at home, an original copy of, first edition of Ferdinando Scianna, Religious Parties in Sicily, which is a mind-blowing work, and also a book from Robert Capa, but Robert Capa was then, I saw also elsewhere. My dream was, as I said before, photography satisfied my curiosity to engage with the world around me, and naturally I was looking in the immediacy of where I was, and I was living back then in Brixton. I was assisting Hélène Binet. I was working in bars at night. I was doing the school. I had a pretty busy schedule for the first 4 years of my life. And what I could photograph was on my surrounding. And so I photographed Brixton quite a lot. And I attempted later on in the years to do a story on crack cocaine in Brixton in the early 2000s, inspired by Eugene Richards' Cocaine True, Cocaine Blue. And the story then intertwined with a longer and unpredicted story that took most of my life, so from about 15 years, which I never realized was a story until the tragic moment where this friend of mine that I was taking pictures of for 15 years died. His name is Jimmy, and this is the very first photograph I took of him. He was a big fellow who I met while working as a back bar in Brixton at the Nostra, and we became immediately very good friends. And photography somehow helped me to engage more with his life. And I soon discovered he was affected by severe schizophrenia, and he was a very peculiar person indeed. But the love between us was stronger than any kind of divide of backgrounds or any issues that he would have had, or even me. And so we became brothers, and I photographed him all the time without having this story in mind. But things got always more and more complicated because his schizophrenia took over his life entirely. And then also developed terminal kidney failure, which forced Jimmy in the hospital beds for the good last 10 years of his life or so, something like that. And we were really going together in his path. I visited funerals, baptisms, weddings, all that was going on with the Jamaican community in Brixton. I was in the very thick of it. And it was beautiful. I was learning a lot of stuff, and I always had this passion for the cultures of the south of the world, because as a Sicilian, I felt like a South America from Europe, no? The equivalent of, I was the Jamaican of Italy, no? In my mind. And this is a sequence I wanted to show you, and I don't really show it very often, that shows how quickly the moods could change in Jimmy's and in our relationship. I was very, very close to him, and I was going every week in hospital, taking care of him, cleaning the floor, cleaning everything, because he was a maniac of hygiene. And I was talking to the doctors. I got my name as a next of kin. And in all this process, photography was always the collant, the glue that accompanied and allowed our friendship to be recorded somehow, because I was really, really close to Jimmy. Of course, mentally, he drifted somewhere else in the last years. And as you can see, there isn't any unity, any kind of stylistic conformity or coherence, because I was taking pictures with my Nikon F, my Leica, my phone, my digital camera, everything. So please understand that this variety of styles is due to the very lack of a plan to draw a story on him. But eventually this story has been published many years after his death. No, actually 2 years after his death. Actually the year when he died. But the sad thing is that he never been able to see the publication that he was really looking forward to see. And this is the moment where he left us. Anyway, this of course took a lot of years, and I didn't know. So I'm now making another step backwards. And this is in 2000, where I worked for the very first personal project, on my very first personal project. Before that, I did only one commission as an editorial photographer, and I dived for a bit into the world of advertising, where I've been sent to Cuba, to Spain, to Italy to work on global advertising campaigns, which was very successful. I was full of money, I was having the time of my life, but really I was always left dry because I never liked that kind of commercial photography. And mind you, now I am eating, like biting my fingers, my nails, my everything, because my career have been up and down financially, like zillions of camels, one behind each another. If only I would have been a smarter person back then, but I was too young. Anyway, I wanted to pursue the career of reportage photographer. So I abandoned that little bracket, that successful bracket of advertising photography, and concentrated myself on working on my very first personal project, on a street game played in the popular districts of Palermo called Tocco. And Tocco is a game that is illegal to play because it involves a lot of violence, and it's a very ancient game. The origins are from the 1700, and it comes from the French culture. The game basically consists in a bunch of people sitting around the table and throwing numbers, and then a boss will come out of this count, who will decide who is going to be his assistant, and then they order who drinks and who doesn't in a certain order and for certain quantities. And of course, this creates an hierarchy around the table. And by observing this game over and over again, you soon realize that this is somehow a metaphor of how mafia society works. There is pyramidal, there is someone who decides the sorts of others, and there is violence involved, and it's somehow a ruthless game where you don't have someone who wins and someone who loses, but you have both winners and losers. And so I spent several months taking pictures in this district of Palermo called Calza, which now is very much different. All the people that you see in here are dead or in jail. And I had my very first solo show in Sicily in July 2000. And this gave me a lot of push, gave me a lot of encouragement to carry on that approach of working on personal projects. So I can define myself as a photographer who works on long-term projects. This is what I do. I prefer this to work on commissions that are scattered here and there. Then yes, they give you financial stability, but what I look for is to satisfy my curiosity, to spend time and time with the objects of my curiosity, because I want to feel part of the world through photography. This is what allows me to really feel alive and to dive into the world, and to be able then to pull out, observe my photographs, share them with other people, and share the content of things I take pictures of. My idea was that I would have become a war photographer. I thought I had all the ticking boxes, whatever you say, to become a war photographer. I didn't have a clue really of what would have entailed. And I decided I took consciously the decision of taking the first step towards this career in the worst moment possible, because it was 2001, the industry was changing drastically. The internet took over. The small agencies were retrieving. Bigger agencies were adopting a totally different attitude towards the photographers who they collaborated with, and digital photography was taking over. So it was about a race of who was publishing first and what. And if you were not represented by the right agency, you would have fell on the back of the queue in no time. And so this is what happened to me. Because 1 month after the collapse of the Twin Towers, I decided to go to Peshawar, on the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, in the hope of crossing the border and going to Kabul. This never happened because, I don't know if you remember, the tribal area was impossible to cross, and I didn't have the resources to wait until they finally opened the border and everyone poured in to Kabul. So I took pictures of Afghan refugees instead, working on bricks factories on the northeast of Pakistan, near the border. And I decided to take on this story because this was a story related still with what was going on in Afghanistan. And these families of refugees were working 13 hours a day for nothing, just to have some bread and a place where to sleep. And it really moved me to be confronted by such hardship, which I really never really came across before in such with such evident features. But when I came back from Pakistan, I was represented by Cat's Pictures, and the Cat's Pictures was a mess. They were closing down, they were reassigning editors. It was the embedment of the tragedy of what happened with photography in that time. And I was assigned to a fashion editor who was dealing with this kind of images, and of course he didn't have the right contacts, he didn't really know what to do with my photographs, and they stayed closed in a drawer.
Were you shooting on analog or digital?
Analog.
What camera?
Nikon F5. And did I have a Leica? I don't remember. Nikon F5 for sure. Possibly Leica. Leica M6 and Nikon F5. But this was Leica M6, now I remember, because I was taking pictures with the Nikon F5 of the protests taking place in Peshawar. You know, it was automatic camera, zzz, 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 while this one was more of a reflective thing. I didn't want to have the big beast with me, and I brought my Leica M6, yeah. Then, because of course I got depressed, because I didn't sell anything, I didn't have money, I didn't have any more strength, emotional strength to do anything, because I felt a complete failure. I had also a terrible relationship with a German girl, and I was really down. I had no money, no will of doing nothing. I was really, really disappointed with the industry. My dreams of becoming a war photographer were totally shattered, thank God, because I'm still alive. And also I prefer the way it went, you know, because I love what I do now. But when you're young, you really think about the adventure, about being close to death, blah, blah, blah. You read all these books, you look at all these images, and you identify with that romantic idea of the war photographer with a keffia scar and coming back from places and telling stories. I did everything apart from the keffia and risking bullets. Although in Brazil I did risk bullets, but that wasn't intentional. Anyway, so what happened in 2003? I was in such a terrible state that I immediately said yes when a journalist from Sao Paulo in Brazil invited me to work on a long-term project with her on recycling. And I said immediately yes. I didn't really have any curiosity about Brazil, but it was 2003. Argentina was in a terrible economical disaster, and so I said, you know what? What I'll do a week of work in Brazil, and then I will spend 1 month in Argentina working in Buenos Aires on the financial crisis. And I had it all planned, fantastic, about the open tickets, blah, 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 blah. What happened? I arrived in Brazil and I got totally in love with the country. I loved it to bits. I was said, Jesus, this is a dream coming true, which wasn't a dream. It's a dream now that finally is coming true, but I never intended it to be so. So I really engaged with the story on recycling, and I traveled between Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro with a truck driver that was bringing petrol from Sao Paulo to Rio and rubbish to be recycled from Rio to Sao Paulo. I was doing a lot of stories in Sao Paulo about people that were collecting recyclable material, such as aluminum or plastic or glass, whatever. And I constructed a healthy, good series of different stories that I then sold and exhibited, and I did things about it. But when I went to Rio de Janeiro, I discovered paradise and hell in the same place. And this reminded me very much about Sicily, because Sicily is also pretty much, Laura knows that Sicily is very much a place that has fire and ice, paradise and hell, mixed together in a wonderful, crazy mixture. And there are, of course, very sad features of it, but it's also something that grabs you from the heart and doesn't want you to go. So I involved myself with people that was living in the favelas, on the margin of society, and worked on a story called Marginal Brazil. And so I visited a lot of favelas. I went to the beach, which was a frank zone where the favelados had somehow the possibility of enjoying the public spaces without being somehow stigmatized. And I ended up spending 3 months in Brazil and 2 days in Argentina. That's the thing. I visited these mountains of rubbish that were illegal dumps, where people was working, actually living and working on these mountains. And there again, there were families with small kids sorting the rubbish brought by the vans. And it was terrible. First of all, the smell of rubbish never leaves you for a good 3 years after you've been for such a long time in these mountains of rubbish. Then you see the total sadness of a social divide that you are part of, but you never really been confronted by. I am part of the opposite equation. No, I am part of the equation only on the opposite lucky side. But what really unites me with them is this terrible, crazy shit called capitalism. And where there is poverty, I learned through photography that that world is not a different world from your world. It's only they are paying for our commodities. And this is also something that helped me understand how society works on a larger scale. So being confronted by such reality is really an eye-opener, because we all live very comfortably here, and we are not confronted by terrible sadness and terrible social divide. Yeah, homeless we see, but the homeless, we are so used to it that we don't even pay attention to them somehow. They become the invisibles, no? But when you go to somewhere very different and you're confronted with a reality that is very, very strong, then you realize that whatever is working here doesn't work there. And this equation is being created by the capitalistic approach to economy. And so it's very sad. Anyway, so these people were desperate, and I was in these favelas that were lawless places where I arrived with the lorry driver. The guy told me, that was a week into me being in Brazil, never spoke Portuguese in my life, and he was saying to me, and we were really talking in gestures, and I basically understood to hide my camera. I hid my camera, and I went very, very, very carefully approaching the people, asking permissions, and eventually taking the camera out, blah, 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 blah. And I remember one day, after a very hard day of work, I went to have a drink in this place. Now imagine these villages that are built on the ground, on the foot of these mountains of rubbish. 24 years of rubbish, they become huge mountains. But mountains, that you need a car to go up to the top. And they are governed by the drug lords. And at the entrance there is the police. There is corrupt anyway. So in this village, they grew at the foot of these mountains. You have prostitutes on one side and gunmen on the other side, just like a Western movie, okay? And there is people holding M16, big semi-automatic weapons, and they're all there, you know, casually walking up and down the street, while there are pigs messing about with each other, where there is limbs of pigs being dried and interiors being dried and laid onto the rubbish for us to eat at the bar where I went at the end of the night. So I was offered this local speciality, which was terrible. It was intestine from pig, slightly elegantly cooked, only a bit vapor, no? So it was disgusting, and I was drinking a lot of cachaça, which is the local rum. At one certain point I feel a hand behind my back, and I turn and I see this huge gun pointing at my belly, and he asked me if I had any money, and of course I went like that, and thankfully the person I was with he intervened and said, just go away, this guy is with me. And he left, and then he came back, and we had a drink together. And I was, you know, my heart was pounding like he never pounded in my... I said, eventually, do I have a heart or 2 or 3? It was crazy. And then I did in 2005 an exhibition in Covent Garden, and this is a small folded whatever poster that I produced. And I have only 3 of those, and that's why I didn't bring it in here, but it's really beautiful. And I printed it in Hackney Wick when they still were the printers, the lithographic printers. It was such a beautiful thing, Hackney Wick, back then. Anyway, the photographs then had been exhibited in 2014 in a international festival in Indonesia. And I was very pleased with the display and with the catalogue. And now we jump a few years after. That was 2003, 2005, and I came renewed. My depression went. I met a new girl. She's so beautiful. We married and we have a daughter together. And she's also brainy, dangerously brainy, for the ego of a man, you know. And so what happened is that I came back with a new identity. I speak now fluent Portuguese. I regain confidence in my photography and in life in general, despite having been confronted by some terrible stuff. But it's good to understand how things work and try to do something with whatever your tools of operating in society are. In my case, the camera. Sometimes my words, or sometimes a debate, or whatever. But I prefer the camera. Anyway, in 2007, my then girlfriend needed to go to Senegal for 9 months to work on her PhD. And she's an historian working on development and colonialism and the implications of European presence in Africa, in the south of the world. I told you, very brainy, you know. And so she had to go for 9 months, and I really didn't want to go for 9 months. Didn't really want to be 9 months without her. So I decided to go as well to Senegal. And again, I had my plans, no? Like I had my plans when I went to South America. I had my plans to go to West Africa for the very first time in my life. So I said to myself, wow, okay, great. Africa, black people, contrast, this and that. I was totally ignorant, okay? I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything at all about West Africa, the serious implication of colonialism, blah, 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 blah. So things that everyone knows somehow, but I was very, very, very much ignorant. Anyway, I went there, and the very first time with these ideas of portraiture in the streets of Dakar, blah, 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 I take my Hasselblad, and a swarm of people came onto me, a mob, and I was almost lynched in the street. I got the clear message that I couldn't take a single picture because I was the white man stealing the images, profiting from their miserable existence somehow. And I was very, very angry. I really didn't understand anything. I was angry at myself, I was angry at Senegal, I was angry at Dakar, I was angry with my girlfriend, I invested money for nothing, I didn't know what to do, I cried, and then eventually the last resort was to go back to the only place where I really saw an image that struck me. And it was this surreal landscape. There was, that I saw on the way from the airport to where we were staying in Dakar, and there were bridges being built, the ramp, people walking on the motorway. It was very much like, wow, where am I, you know? And this surreal look. I didn't take acids. The surreal look of this periphery part of town really attracted my curiosity, and it was also my last resort. What could I do in a place where you cannot take pictures? So I went with my camera, I hid it in my bag, I went to this place on the edge of Dakar, and when I took my camera and I took the first photographs, suddenly people didn't mind me at all, and if they did mind me, they came with a very friendly attitude, asking what I was doing, because I was a white man taking pictures on the edge of the city, on the motorway in construction, and I was triggering the same level of curiosity to them that I had for them, that I never went to West Africa, so I was of course curious, and so I've been able to play on the same ground of the local population. And I took this very exciting first roll of images. I came back and I told everything to my girlfriend, and she told me that this was the first motorway being built in Dakar. They would have linked Dakar to the rest of the country, meaning a revolution in the transports and the local economy, blah, 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 blah. And we started discussing, and we identified this as somehow an arena where development, this thing called development, could have been somehow articulated with images. And so I dived into this story, and I worked on this for a year, trying to identify the features of a transforming city and how a people was adapting to this transformation on the edge of the town. So new bridges were being built, new districts were being built, some blocks of flats were being knocked down. So it was a total revolution for the economical and social life of Dakar. And I was lucky enough to be mentored by Martin Parr, who helped me out through the process and pushed me to take better and better pictures, to never get satisfied on something. Sometimes I was saying I was coming back from one trip, and he said, why didn't you do that on that picture? This is wrong, you should have done like that. I said, well, but I said 1 hour in taking this picture, Mr. Martin. And he said 1 hour. You should stay weeks, months on one picture before calling it a day. I said, okay. And when I thought I was finishing I finished with Dakar, I had to go back, and I took 80% of the most successful pictures that I have there, thanks to Martin Parr. He's a brilliant genius. He knows exactly what, how, and when. And I thank myself of having the receptors to get this genius. And I was really happy to work with him on this. And these are the images, some of the images, of course. And this remains today one of the stories I am most proud of.
What I find really quite interesting is that your approach to go somewhere and to immerse yourself into the local life, let's say, and to extract your story almost like locally. So where you said, okay, let's see what I can do here. I've got the feeling, and I don't know if you see it similarly, I've got the feeling that maybe the young generation of photojournalists become like essayists basically. So they kind of start out with a pretty concrete idea of what they want to achieve, and then they start shooting. They do a lot of research, they know pretty much really like what they want to get out of it, and then they shoot, and then that's it. Whereas your approach seems to be you really, which is a much more risky approach, I guess, but maybe also, I don't know, maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Maybe also more, whenever you risk something, maybe your gain can be higher, to really immerse yourself really into a situation, because it could also be a complete failure, right? I mean, what if you wouldn't have found something? Maybe you can always find something, but it certainly is much more risky. Would you agree that the young, is there something that different than the current approach?
Absolutely, but also my failures you won't be seeing in here. The total failure. Some failures you've seen, the pictures that I didn't manage to syndicate when I came back from Pakistan, for instance. But you will see that later on, I will show you a totally different approach, which requires quite a lot of research. But I agree with you that the things have drastically changed. And I think this reflects somehow also how schools have transformed. The schools now are crazy, are amazing. They are temples of knowledge. The tutors, head of the courses are people that have incredible experience in the field. They are extremely articulate people. They are really successful in what they do. And of course, what the students learn is way better than what we were learning or not learning back then. The LCP was a shithole before. Now is one of the best schools in the country, and you are spoiled for choice, from Belfast to Bristol to London to Cardiff, Nottingham, Norwich, Rochester, Falmouth. They are crazy schools now. So students now are very lucky, A. Second, the role of the photographer or the photojournalist has changed drastically. The market has changed drastically. There isn't really a market as such that you can rely upon as a unique source of income. You have to diversify. Documentary photography has flirted so much with fine art, and fine art has taken a lot of contents from documentary photography, that now the two fields are intertwined, and festival photography is now, you could call them art festivals. A good photographer is a photographer that is recognized and legitimized by how do you say? Legitimized, yeah, in the art world. So it's totally different. But you will see that I don't have only this very immediate approach somehow. This is what I've been doing on some of the stories up until a certain moment. But I will show you as we go along other approaches that I have adopted.
Which camera did you use?
Hasselblad 500 cm. I should have them paying me, the bastards. They're not bastards. I love the camera. I love the people at Hasselblad. Yeah. Disclaimer.
I love taking pictures of people when I go away, but I always find it hard. Like, you know, when you you're super hesitant on taking pictures of people.
I didn't get.
So I love taking pictures of people, but when you go away, and you want to take pictures of people, there's always that hesitance to take people's pictures. But how do you ask them first, or do you?
A variety of things. Sometimes I ask, sometimes I don't. Yeah. Sometimes I wait for so long. Like, for instance, this picture here is a part of a series of pictures. And this is, as a matter of fact, one of the pictures that I failed at the beginning, and then Martin Parr told me to go back to Senegal to try more and harder. And there was a bridge being built just on my back, so people couldn't really cross the street going from one district to the other one. This is part of how people interact with the urban transformations, no? And there was this spartitraffico, division. You have two carriages and you have something in the middle. Something that divides. Is there a word?
Yeah, the central reservation.
How do you say?
On the motorway, it's a central reservation, but it's like a barrier.
Okay, yeah, this barrier. And so I put myself on, I sat onto this barrier, and I stayed for hours and hours, days after days, trying to grab the action, trying to grab pictures that were somehow meaningful, and I have a lot of this series. And in this case, I sat there with my Hasselblad, with my bent head like that, and no one was taking notice of me. So the world was passing 1 meter away from me, and no one noticed I was in the middle of the motorway with an Hasselblad. you know. So sometimes you just have to snap a picture. Sometimes you have to wait in the right place for the right moment to arrive. And some other times, especially if you want to take some portraits, you have to ask. But things have changed drastically. Street photography in London, the way I was doing it, I don't really do it anymore. I had a lot of issues. I've been punched by girls, very angry that I was taking. I'm not a sexual maniac, despite I wouldn't, you know, I like the jigginess, but I'm not like a sexual maniac taking pictures of. But I was in Covent Garden taking a picture, and this woman said, "Did you take a picture?" I said, "Delete the picture." I said, "I don't have any intention to delete the picture, especially if you speak to me like this." And she boom, punched me. And then I said, "Oh, well, now you have no chance whatsoever." And so I left, and she carried on, she went after me, and then blah blah. I said, "Look, stop," and then stop, please, look, I'm going, look, and then I went to a taxi. I went into the taxi, and then she said, "Don't let him go," he said, blah, 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 blah. And the taxi driver didn't know what to do, and of course I understand that, you know, he didn't know anything, so I said, "Please get out." I went out, I said, "Look, I'm calling the police." And so I called the police arrived, and eventually they separated us, and I told what happened, and they said, "Do you want to press charges?" I said, "No, I really only want to go home. So if you can hold a crazy lady, I'd be more than thankful." So I did. So it's, but all,
Did you keep the picture?
the picture was terrible, was blurred.
Did they ask you to delete or not?
Well, they said, "Could you delete it? It would be kind if you would delete it." I said, "Kind to someone who punched me in the head?"
Yeah, but
Doesn't really-
there's issues with this laws and stuff.
Yes. But the issue is not only with the law, because by law I could take the picture, and I'm only I only have the limitation of not using it for commercial reasons, purposes. But there is an ethical
Yeah,
and sociological
but I'm always as well,
issue.
That's a good question, because I'm as well hesitant. Oh, can I?
Look, it's a very sensitive subject, and with social media and how images are diffused, it becomes a reason of concern.
They can find you and say, "Oh,
No, they can find you. If I take a picture of you and you are together with a gentleman, and I'm taking a picture of you, and it's a beautiful picture, and a gentleman is not your husband, okay? And you are engaging, and I'm taking this picture, and you are being exposed somehow on social media. It's not that it didn't happen before, there couldn't be the same risk before, but now the outlets are amplified to the nth number. And of course people became more paranoid. It's not that I don't understand. It's only about being able to, you know, be respectful towards the others, but also being able to carry out your work as a photographer. So you have to find a balance. But we can talk about it later, because this is crazy.
In the art world, it's definitely shifted. I mean, as a photographer, you've almost got a sense of responsibility. And therefore, you know, let's say if you go to somewhere, are you going to make money? What are you do? How are you taking it? What kind of respect do you have towards that person?
Yeah, but you cannot let these stop photography, because you have to draw a line somewhere.
You can put a black, if you become a famous photographer, you can have a black mark against you from the art world, if that's what you do.
I'm not familiar with this debate.
It's not very well seen in general in the art world,
I don't know.
I think.
What is?
If people making money out of, so if you I don't know, go to Africa and take a whole bunch of pictures and then come back and have an exhibition. I mean, for instance, usually like I was talking with a gallery in Paris, one of their photographers. He actually has like a contract with the people he takes pictures of, and he helps them, and he works with a local charity. There's a sense about you can't just take, you need to give, because otherwise it's a sort of form of sort of neo-colonialism.
That's very
if you're...
Again, I think it's a very...
But you're assuming everyone who's doing that isn't from Africa?
Wherever. I mean, I think it's, I think the whole society's changed now. I mean, if somebody took a picture
But
of
if you
me,
were from Africa and you were taking pictures of people in Africa and you showed them a gallery and profit from them,
it's
what?
not really. Not really.
This is a bit sad, because what would it be why there would be a problem with a photographer taking pictures of people in Africa and not in here? I think I see this as the same problem, the same ethical
You're
problem.
only saying that I think you if you're white though.
No, not
That's the
necessarily.
argument.
I think it's just a sense of responsibility to society, and I think it's to do with one's intention and the energy that you bring to it. And
you're assuming that you're doing it to earn money, but you're also telling the story, you are communicating, you are...
Yeah, but maybe those people don't want to be part of the story. And maybe their stories are...
There's a public space and people are...
But you can always choose to become a still photographer, still life photographer, studio photographer. No one forbids you to do that. There are several genres. So,
I work for a gallery.
sorry?
I work for a gallery, so I'm not... I mean,
So you're not a photographer?
I am a photographer, but I make money working for a gallery. And it's definitely,
Talking of ethics.
yeah.
But I think it's very much the intention of the photographer.
Yeah.
And generally, these photographers will spend a lot of time with these people. And if that photographer is their behaviour towards the people they're photographing, and that these people know that they're being photographed.
Exactly.
So
And
I don't see what's bad about that.
It's not very black and white. And different
But your whole argument
photographers-
is black and white, though. That's the basis of what you're saying. You're saying that if you're white, you can't go to Africa and
No,
photograph people.
no,
That's basically what you're saying there. But what I'm saying is, I kind of agree with you in that respect. I'm also saying if a black photographer goes to Africa and profits from it, then it's okay, is what you're saying.
No.
May I say, because I don't want to bore you all the night, maybe we can carry on and then we can discuss about ethics of photography later, I guess. Otherwise it's going to take forever.
Thank you.
And this has been published in several magazines everywhere in the world. And I received very flattering recognitions. And I did this publication thanks to my wife, Words, who wrote a fantastic text about it and gave legitimacy to the images. So I'm ever thankful to her. You can ask, how do you fund all this work? Where do you find the money? I'm not rich, and I needed to find the money to go back and forth from Senegal. And so I decided to work on this striking bit of nature, the Baobab trees. And I knew that this kind of subject would have been a really easy subject to sell, because it's very poetic. It's very, it gives itself to lyrical kind of imagery. And so I worked parallelly as I was working in Dakar on the story on the motorway en route to Dakar, I also was working on a story on the Baobab tree. I don't know if you're familiar with this tree, but this tree is at the center of a myth where local populations believe that the gods want to punish the tree that was was having too much vanity. And so the gods decided to take the baobabs and plant them upside down and reveal the roots rather than the heads. And this is the explanation of the trees having such a peculiar shape. And 3 months after I shot these photographs, I published a full feature on the Guardian Weekend magazine, and I used immediately the money to go back to Dakar, buy more films, invest on the development, and blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And now this is the story, Olga, I wanted to show you show all of you, but of course this is a story, this is Terra Nostra, which is a long-term project on the effects of mafia in Sicily. I worked on this story from 2009 until 2016. A long-term project that required a lot of research and a lot of planning. Hence, in here, I adopted a totally different approach. Yes, I had the urge to take pictures of something I had a vague idea of somehow. And then in the times of my research, I shaped the idea around this theme. And I had to go through a lot of books, and from academics, journalists, investigative journalists, activists. I had to interview judges, prosecutors. I did a great deal of work before and during the production of this work. Hence, it's very different, the approach that I adopted here. And I don't know if you're familiar with my book. I published a book with David Lewis called Terra Nostra, and it gave me a lot of satisfaction. Because I had to raise the funds with a crowdfunding campaign, which I managed to succeed in 2 days' time. In 48 hours I reached my goal, and by the end of the campaign I doubled the goal I set initially. And these are some of the images. I tried to look at the permanent presence of a suffocating system ruled by Cosa Nostra. And Laura knows exactly like I do that after the bloodshed of the 80s in Sicily, mafia didn't disappear, simply vanished out suddenly, but it went under, it hid, and he applied a policy of silence. Despite this, the presence of Cosa Nostra is still visible in many aspects of our architecture or our landscapes that are partially destroyed by illegal building speculation. But the economy is also crippled by a parasitarian system ruled by mafia. And of course, mafiosi borrowed back an image given by Hollywood, the Hollywood Godfather, right? And one of the things I wanted to show with this work, it was the lack of glamour, and the clear, plain sadness of what really mafia means for Sicily and for us Sicilians. I traveled everywhere in Sicily, but sadly you will find the province of Palermo, Trapani, Agrigento, Gela, they are really heavily affected. The west coast of Sicily is heavily affected by mafia. It's not that is not there on the other, but the most significant features, you can detect it there. In fact, the province of Messina was called La Provincia Babba. It was called, the Babba means stupid, weak, that you don't count. The mafia, the strong mafia, was always the one from Palermo and Trapani. The current mafia boss that is still in hiding comes from the province of Trapani. And there was only really one ruthless boss in Catania, Nitto Santa Paola, that was anyway from the same family of the Corleonesi. So he was always, more relevant in our part of town, of Sicily.
Did you ever feel threatened by the mafia?
Yes and not. Yes and not. There's nothing sensationalistic about it. I've been threatened more directly when I produced Un Tocco di Calza. That was in the thick of a mafioso district in Palermo, and I photographed people that, in here I have had my share of anxieties, let's say, but nothing bad happened yet. And this book is not distributed in Italy, by the way. It's been published everywhere in the world, it's distributed everywhere, but it's never been published in Italy apart from 2 pictures in Internazionale. Never, in no bookshop, you can find my book in Italy. And I don't imply that this is because it's a sensitive thing. I think, I don't know, maybe I've been ostracized, or maybe the publisher didn't have a proper reach in Italy there, I don't know. Or maybe simply there's no market for my book, I don't know.
Did you ask a lot of those people to take a picture of them?
Some yes, some not. Yes to him, and to them no. This is, for instance, this is the fresh fruit and vegetables market that is totally controlled by Cosa Nostra, entirely. And I was there with my Hasselblad, and again, like when I was in the middle of the road, I gained invisibility, and I was able to photograph with this huge camera, clack, click, clack, clack, without anyone paying attention. So I consider myself very lucky.
Also because you are local.
Also because?
You are local.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't really technically a local in Dakar, though. So it's really how you...
The same language.
Yes, but you can disappear anywhere if you have a bit of streetwise understanding, or if you are not an aggressive photographer, if you're not on the face of people, or if you have a technique of taking pictures that is more meditative and less impulsive.
Did you put names?
Did I go?
Did you put names in your book? Names of these people?
No. Well, some yes, I think. Her? I have a name, Valentina.
And what's the choice to shoot with black and white and not colour? Like, how do you pick, or is it just what you feel?
I keep on asking myself.
Just pick a film and then put it in.
The only luxury I have, and I'll show you now, is that something I shot in color, and then 3 years after, 4 years after, 6 years after, I decided to turn it into black and white. But I don't know. I feel I don't think there is a rational reason. It's somehow. I don't know if I shot this because I shot it in black and white.
Yeah.
So I shot this kind of pictures because I had made a choice of black and white, and if I would have shot the same things, if I would have shot in color, I don't know. Yeah, it's like you're called Michele, and then I come and say, yeah, Michele, you have a face of Michele. But if you would have been called Andrea, would I have thought that you would have still have had the face of Michele or Andrea? I don't know. It's the same kind of thing. I don't know if I, yeah.
No, you did, yeah.
I think the colour would distract. I think they're more powerful in black and white.
Possibly, I don't know.
Do you always shoot a whole series in one color?
Apart from Jimmy, yes, but also I am kind of tired of this. I want to destroy my own self-imposed boundaries. And so I don't know. Until now I've done like that, apart from Jimmy, but that wasn't really technically a story. But
Were you inspiring to Shanna?
sorry, inspired by Shanna. Partially, because really I didn't take notice of that book of the religious festival in Sicily until much later in my life. I was more influenced by my father, and not even Letizia Battaglia that much back then. But yes, the influence, I could definitely tell you that people like Jaromir Funk or Cartier-Bresson or Kertész or James Natchez or Eugene Richards or Eugene Smith, they belong more to who I would refer to as inspirations. And it's strange because both Letizia and Ferdinando are Sicilians and they took pictures in the same contexts, despite being very different, because Letizia Battaglia took pictures of the war, the second war of Mafia, 70s, 80s, early 90s, very little, but that was, you know, the press photography, on Mafia. So I don't know, but yes, I hold them in really high regards. I love both of them. They're not my favorite photographers. Actually, Letizia, yes, is a genius, and that work of Ferdinando Scianna is definitely a genius work, the religious parties in Sicily, but I look also elsewhere, and my inspirations are even young, virtually unknown photographers. I keep on changing my inspirations. I'll surprise you now. Because I'm doing something in color in Sicily. Yes. And yes, it's true that a lot of work in Sicily has been done in black and white, but it's also not true if you look at the production of young, exciting photographers now that are working exclusively in color and are doing amazing work. And some young photographers who are looking at black and white in a totally different way, with a totally different technique, using the flash, and the way the black and white is rendered is very different. You wouldn't associate with this kind of...
She just
Yeah. And the reason why I stopped doing this, and I did it since her age of 1 until 2, is because she had still that semi-conscious thing. So I wasn't violating her own will, and she wasn't really quite sure what was going on, but she wouldn't even question anything. In fact, she doesn't remember anything. She probably is traumatized, but this made her famous, and she's very pleased to be famous. Yes, but not recently, and I intentionally don't want to do it because I want. I hope if I can restrain myself to do it before, I'd like possibly to make a book of this when she's 18 and giving it to her, if I can restrain myself.
Where is your wife from?
Italy.
Just looks so sort of laid back.
It must be fun for you as well to do this.
Sorry?
It must be such a laugh for you to do as well as just seeing something and being like, oh no, I've got to take a picture of her there.
Yeah, the world became a canvas that needed only Nora to be there, and this is really it. What is it? you know. And when I stopped, I was posting this regularly on Instagram. And when I stopped, eventually people said, "Wow, we want more, we want more." It was like people obsessed, like when they see like the telenovelas and they want more, they want more. It was the same thing. Can you please do more? Can you please take? I said, no, I stopped. That's it. And I think I took, after that, I took possibly 1 or 2 pictures when she was maybe 3 or 4 years old. And then I totally stopped.
Where was the school?
In Angel. And then this is a series that I've been working on since 2015 because I got into a big depression due to the fact that Jimmy died the previous year, and then also my father-in-law died while I was trying to do the CPR. So it's been a really tragic period of my life, and I got really depressed. And the beautiful things of photography is that, yes, it exposes you to a lot of things, but also it is there when you need it, photography. Maybe everything for anyone, couldn't be anything else. But for me, photography has been there when I needed. And I had to look at my immediate surroundings, and I wanted to get away from the schemes of my approaches in photography with square format, with formal compositions, with lines and blah, blah, blah. And I wanted to dive violently onto the world around me. And I created this series called East Up Close, and it's a kind of diary of East London seen from proximity.
Did you use the flash?
Yeah.
Very Italian.
Hmm?
It was a very Italian photo for some reason.
Ah, yeah? The elegance of this woman, possibly.
Did you ask for permission?
And
Did you ask for permission?
to her, yes. She would have killed me worse than Matteo Messina Denaro. I wouldn't mess around with her.
What camera did you use?
Fuji X70, now discontinued.
Oh. That's amazing.
And now, you said Sicily black and white. Now, this is my new current project that I'm working on this area called Belice Valley, where there was a terrible earthquake in '68. And I promise this is the last thing I'm showing you, so don't sleep as yet. And I'm working on the aesthetic of a reconstruction that took 40 years to start happen. And when it did happen, it became a really controversial affair, because by the time the construction took place, all the people of this very poor rural area in Sicily emigrated, went away. There was no jobs, no nothing, no economy, no structures, nothing whatsoever. The villages have been totally rasi al suolo.
Raised to the ground.
Yeah, exactly. And so when they reconstructed these villages ex novo, out of from scratch, they reconstructed them with utopian views of big, large towns, accommodating a lot more people than what actually was in that area. This is several towns along the valley called Belice, between Palermo, Trapani, and Menfi. So it's on the west part of Sicily, in the countryside. It was a very remote and rural country. The economy was exclusively rural, and still is. And these new cities are totally inadequate to the population, and the social fabric is unexisting. The individual is alienated. And I wanted to take pictures of this very different part of Sicily. There is not the stereotypical beauty of the coast villages or the stereotypical roughness that you can see in Terra Nostra. So I wanted to challenge myself with something very different, very uncomfortable, very somehow, to some degrees, repulsive, antiseptic, fake, something that is inadequate for the individual. And this is what I'm working on at the moment. I could tell you more, but really, truly, I don't want to bore you.
Is it gentrifying? Not gentrifying, what's the word? Is it growing, or is it...
Is really imploding rather than growing. This is an external, an open-air market that is in total disuse, like most of these towns. These, the infrastructures are poor. Whatever is there is really inadequate or a total waste of money and space. Is not proportionate to the economy and to the life of the villages. And look at this. This looks like a spaceship. No, this is a church. That was a church.
Wow. They basically rebuilt the area in a way that is super surreal.
With this, it's kind of the death of the modernist idea of being able to create something on paper for this kind of very pretentious approach to urbanism that is really I mean, look at Milton Keynes. Probably the most successful thing, which is beautiful, and I love it to bits, is Barbican Centre in London. But it is similar to that kind of approach, despite the fact that the Barbican Centre is really successful, but it's because it's embedded in the city. This is rural, isolated towns where there's nothing.
Most probably the people that lived there didn't want that sort of structure, architecture.
Exactly.
They didn't want that.
The reason why I called it in limbo is because these people have been in this limbo for decades, and they still live with this bitterness in the.
Sorry, it took 40 years to rebuild it.
It took, not that it took 40 years to build a church, but. The whole thing took even more, even 50 years. It took several decades. I'm researching now an academic paper written by an urbanist, but because it's very dense and big, it's taking time. So this is really fresh work, shot in September. And I'm researching a lot. I'm intending to do a book, but the reason I can answer, the quick answer is that it took ages for the people to be assigned the status of refugees, being displaced first in barracks and then in temporary housing, and then after years these towns have been reconstructed, and eventually the houses assigned to the lawful owners. The money from the regional, national government and the European funds took time to arrive, no? And of course, in all of this, you put the mafia, you put corruption, you put a very inefficient system that has as a main priority enriching the pockets of a few functionaries and local politicians, rather than offering services to the population.
No, actually, the question was because you said that it was for much more people than was living there, but if it took so much time and they were refugees, maybe they even left, so they're going to be even less
Absolutely,
People knows,
but
their
you
houses.
you don't earn money if you create a small street
Yeah.
and a small village measured to the population. You make money, you know how? Because you make a big plan and you make a lot of districts, and the road is really large, so you need a lot of cement, a lot of asphalt. You can give favors, you can give business to local firms that will capitalize profit on the whole project. And they don't really care if then for you 8 years old, lonely woman cannot go to the church or to the baker, which is on the other side of a massive town that you have never been accustomed to.
There's a negative shadow there.
Looks like.
Does not feel lively at all.
Hmm?
Does not feel lively at all. It's very...
It is, as you see, really. I usually don't claim objectivities in my work, but this is pretty much what is it. I still have to amplify this, expand this work a lot. I have to work a lot. I have identified the bits that I'm missing, but I'm really happy with where I got so far.
And again, it becomes supernatural when there is in color.
Yes.
It's like,
This was it was somehow Adam's rib from Terra Nostra. I had this work in my mind for a few years, and also I was tired of black and white, and I wanted to because during Terra Nostra I saw things that were in color, and I couldn't, no, and so I had these seeds that eventually they mature. And they come up with an idea of working on something. And again, in here, I am making a lot of research first. Of course, there is an instinctive thing.
But it works in color because it's so depressed.
Well, Terra Nostra doesn't work in black and white.
Because it's so depressed and it's like so bright, and at the same time you have to have some happiness, and boom, it's not very...
Yeah, thank you. I agree with you. And this is the reason why I did it in color. And I think it really offers that. Colors also is more of a sober, in this case, a sober look, while the black and white puts a bit of a distance. You romanticize a bit the way I used the black and white, romanticize a lot the subject. And it's not, I find it also problematic, but I am very autocritical. So I do find the things that I don't love 100%. I do recognize some problematics to some of my works or some aspects of some works, and and also I see the advantages and the good guesses that I got. And I think in here I also did, an accurate choice. I wouldn't conceive this work in black and white.
Also because we can see the difference between the old houses, the old apartments.
Yeah, and the new, that you wouldn't see only with the texture, for instance, yeah, as well, yes. But that's it. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
We can maybe, if anyone has maybe some questions, maybe 2 or 3, because I know we need to leave here by about 9 o'clock. Does anyone have any questions?
Have you ever felt pressure, like, as you said, like, photography is like obviously expanding so much on the internet, and you have your social media networks and you are posting on Instagram and everything, and people are demanding some kind of images from you, and you decide like, okay, I stopped Nora in places, for example, that's over. But have you ever feel like the pressure, like the tendency of your work was decided by someone else's choices, or like people were posing for some kind of images, the most successful ones, and that was driving your style, even if it was not your choice.
Do you mean if I was led to somehow at some point to produce stuff that was somehow responding to whether a market need or something like that?
Yeah, influenced by that, even like non-commissioned.
I don't know, because I would be rich by this if I would have made this kind of decisions, and I'm not. So I don't know. Maybe I got influenced somehow by some trends at some points, and I flirted with some ideas, started a few things, put them aside, but really none of the things that you are seeing in here, as far as I can tell, have responded directly, consciously to an external thing. I should do it though, you know.
I guess obviously, like, if you always do exactly the same stuff, whatever, let's say like the Rolling Stones, yeah, whatever, if you buy an album now, it sounds pretty much like the old stuff. It's a little bit sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think the really good artists, they, on the one hand side, they take inspirations, but still stay true to their style or their basic idea. And really say, let's say, like the last series, those almost paradoxical spaces, those observations of those spaces that almost like, some of them almost like don't really seem to make sense, basically. Yeah? I think that's obviously, looks like has some references to, let's say, like deadpan photography. Yeah, so a few elements, but it's still your style. So I think that's ultimately what makes a good artist. I think that you absolutely do develop, yeah, as an artist, yeah, that you respond to trends, but that you stay true to your theme, basically, that you have found in your work.
I hope so, because I still didn't manage to satisfy myself with what I am. I'm still researching. I wish I was to a degree more consistent, but at the same time I find consistency very boring. And also I already self-impose, I have a lot of self-imposed limitations, and I think that breaking from my own rules keeps me in the mind younger. I think, I don't know. I agree with what you say. There could be a counter argument saying that artists that show consistency and uniformity throughout their career are somehow more easy to pinpoint, not pigeon. How do you call the pigeon thing? There is a negative connotation to that. I meant on the positive spectrum of the same thing. Pinpoint, you can identify that thing, you can refer to that thing. And there are photographers that are like this, Antoine Dakar, Jacobo Subol, Martin Parr for most of his career, Daido Moriyama, these people, one thing. Oh, chapeau, they are like super artists. So it's not that I would see only the consistency versus the variation of thing. It's where you go with it, the contents that you photograph. Possibly, yes, this is I wish I would have had more consistency in the contents. Probably. But then again, I don't know. I don't want to think too much about it. I rather work and focus on how good or bad the work is and making it as best as I can, and then do the next thing. I don't know. I would leave to art critic to read my own production. I don't know. I have doubts, but I'm happy as well. I don't know. Sorry?
We're making you think about this.
Yeah.
Which project was the most fun to shoot?
Nora there, definitely. If we have to talk about fun, because I was really laughing.
Yeah, you can say that. Looks the most fun.
Huh?
It looks the most fun.
Yeah.
Well, the crisis. Why you wanted to go to Argentina for them to check the crisis there? You went in the end, 10 years later, to Greece to photograph that. What was calling your attention, or what were you thinking? I'm just curious about.
I didn't get it
What
to
were
be.
you looking for? What were you looking for? Why you were like? You mentioned you wanted to go to Argentina because of the crisis. Then you went to Greece because of the crisis. Were you? There was something in your head. What was motivating you?
I was always inclined to tackle social issues, and so for me the tragedy, economic downfall in Argentina in 2002, it was a big sign of a global financial crisis. Somehow, what would have happened later, and it did happen. Not that I am an economist and I know for sure, but you sensed that collapse was bigger than a normal recession. And in Italy, for instance, we who are against populist, anti-European politicians, and we know where we would have gone if we would have gone away from the euro. Okay, in Italy, we would have become Argentina, and we take that as something that something that we wouldn't have wanted to go there. No. Back then, I had an urge to be on the front of history. Remember that I said I wanted to be a war photographer. I wanted to be a photographer that was witnessing the most relevant changes in our time. It was very ambitious, very somehow naive, but mixed with an honest tension towards approaching social themes. Then that made sense back then. But then again, I wouldn't make the same decision now. I wouldn't think the same way. I could have taken pictures about Brexit. I could have taken pictures about coronavirus. I'm not that kind of photographer anymore. I decide to now approach things from a different perspective. Maybe more personal, maybe less engaged with the press. Also because the press is depressing. The press since 2008 is ended. It's all portraits. You don't see stories. If you're a portrait photographer, you are very likely to succeed as an editorial photographer. If you are a photographer who still thinks that they need you in the field to report from that thing, I don't think that there will be the chance.
Good. We have to leave it here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.